Hi Founder fans, Jason here, and today's founder is Esther Reed, the Treasuress General of the Ladies Association, an organization she started to help solicit donations for the Continental Army. Now, Esther Reed was born Esther de Burnt over in London, and her father was a very wealthy merchant, one of the merchants who helped end the dreaded stamp tax because it was affecting their business, and many of the merchants went to Parliament and the king and said, hey, you got to get rid of this tax. They're not buying our stuff over in the colonies. Now, Esther Reed was affected by this in two ways. First of all, as I said, her father was one of these merchants, and at the time she was working as his secretary. Additionally, this young woman had a love interest, Joseph Reed. And Joseph Reed, he was from America. He was studying law over in Britain, but he went back to America when the Stamp Act came around and for various other reasons to take care of family business. But they wrote love letters back and forth across the ocean, and those letters often devolved into politics. Eventually, Joseph comes back to London to finish his studies, and there is where he marries Esther. Shortly thereafter, unfortunately, Esther's father passes away, and Joseph and Esther decide to move where his family is from, over in Philadelphia. They go there and bring her mother along, which is fascinating, and the Revolutionary War breaks out. And it's about this time that George Washington himself convinces Joseph to join the Continental Army and go with him, and Joseph actually acts as an aide-de-camp briefly early in the war outside Boston. Esther, unfortunately, is left back home to care for her mother and eventually 4 children. Now, once the British come for Philadelphia, Esther has to evacuate, and she travels in pretty arduous situations all over the northern colonies until eventually the Patriots do take back Philadelphia, or the British basically give it back. Esther returns to Philadelphia, and it's in this scenario that she writes a paper. And in 1780, she writes an article that's published called The Sentiments of an American Woman, where she talks about, essentially, at a time where women and men were treated very unequally, she's argued that women were certainly equal to men when it came to patriotism. And what's the most patriotic thing you can do? Give your money to the army. And she did. She started an organization called the Ladies Association, and the first one broke out in Philadelphia, where she was from, but eventually they popped up all over the nation, and they solicited money and donations to help support the war effort. Now, she is named Treasuress General. The Ladies Association gave these rankings out, not the Continental Army. It wasn't an official title, but each state named its first lady Treasuress General. And yes, her husband Joseph, by this point, had been chosen, after signing the Articles of Confederation, chosen as president, or governor, as we would call it today, of Pennsylvania. So she was the first lady of Pennsylvania while she's doing this, and that's why she's given Treasuress General. But she is the Treasuress General in our eyes and minds because she's the one who created the organization. Now, she raises all this money and was supposed to send it to Mistress Washington, as they called Martha Washington. Unfortunately, Mistress Washington was a little preoccupied at the time, so Esther had to write and send money directly to George Washington. Now, George Washington kind of gives her a little pushback, believe it or not. He says, please don't send us money. We can't give money to the soldiers. They'll just spend it on booze, and we won't be able to fight this war that we're having a little bit of trouble with in the first place. So Washington says, what we do need are uniforms. So Esther and the Ladies Association takes the money, and they end up spending the money on cloth and fabric, and they sew uniforms for the Continental Army. Approximately 2,200 uniforms, which is a lot to sew by hand. Now, Esther wanted to have each woman sew their name into the collar of each shirt, so that each soldier would realize this isn't just a uniform for your fight. You are fighting for all of us, including the people back home, and specifically this one person dedicated their time and efforts to support you. Now, unfortunately, Esther never saw this. She catches, at 34 years old, while this is going on, she catches dysentery and passes away fairly suddenly at, again, just 34 years of age. The organization is then taken over by Sarah Franklin Bach, who is Benjamin Franklin's daughter. And she jumps on as Treasuress General, and she's the one who oversees the implementation of the sewing of the shirts, and as per Esther's wishes, the stitching of the person's name into each collar. Whoever was doing the stitching stitched their own name into the collar. And raised all this support for the Continental Army, not just physically getting them the clothes, but getting donations from common people and bringing a little bit of patriotism to the war effort. Now, Esther Reed, arguably, because of this, did more to help support directly the Continental Army than perhaps any other woman at the time, at least financially support the Continental Army. So that's the story of Esther Reed, a fascinating and often overlooked American founder. I hope you learned a little something today. If you did, do me a favor, hit like so more people can learn about the channel and therefore learn about the American Revolution along with us. If you're new here, subscribe. I put out videos about the American Revolution 7 days a week, and I'll be back with another founder for you tomorrow.